Hi, my name is Rosa, and I am your host for Surviving Your ADU podcast. Um, I am an architectural designer and a general contractor, and I am doing this podcast to help people make better decisions when making and designing or building your ADU. And today's podcast, we're going to talk about layouts and design. Is there such a thing as good design, or is there such a thing as bad design? And what is the difference? According to me, of course. um, so, is there such a thing as a bad design? Yes, there is such a thing as a bad design. Is it because it's just my opinion or the opinions of a lot of people that are in this industry? Well, it depends, but basically for me, a good design is a design that addresses the needs and the wants of your clients. It's a design that is functional and at the same time it's aesthetically pleasing. But it takes into consideration what the client wants. And then what makes a design a bad design, in my opinion, right? What is it? One, it's a design that does not take into consideration the needs and wants of the client. It doesn't. It's not functional, and a lot of times, what I find from unexperienced designers is that they focus their designs more on some aesthetic, designs or functions, or, they want it to look a certain way, and they take that into account more than the functionality of the project. And I think that's a typical mistake of new designers, because they think that if they look a certain way, if the design looks a certain way, it's better because, it aesthetically looks good, but then functionality wise is very bad. And you learn those things over the course of your career. And hopefully, when you hire someone to do your project, you hire someone that is more experienced rather than less experienced, so that you have a more functional and at the same time a pleasing, aesthetically pleasing layout and design. But it doesn't take away comfort. I think that is one of the main reasons that a lot of people don't like modern construction, because they find it to be very uncomfortable and cold, because everything is gray or everything is white and there's no room for colors. No. And I think that's why a lot of people don't like modern design or contemporary designs. At least in my experience, that's what a lot of clients had said to me. So I'm going to tell you a story of a client of mine. I was working as the general contractor for him. And this was for a really big house. It was more than 10,000 square foot house, and it was being designed by a very well-known architect in the LA area. And I remember we were going to a design review, and, we had gone a few times already, and there was the master suite was being designed and discussed. And I remember the client said, I don't want this to be, I think it was in the bathroom. There was some cabinets there, and then like a little hallway that led into the master closet. And the way that the architects were designing it, the client didn't like it because he kept saying, I don't think that's gonna look good. I don't think that's gonna look good. And the architects didn't change it. So this third time we were meeting with them and they had not changed that area. And he said, when we're in the meeting, I want you to tell them that I don't want it like that. And I looked at him and I said, why don't you tell them yourself? And he was like, I don't want to look like a bad person to them, but they're not listening to me. So you need to be like very firm and say that I want this to be changed. And I thought, wow, like sometimes we as designers take or think that we know better than the client, but ultimately the client is the person that's going to use the space. So if the client does not like what he's seeing and has, let you know a few times that he doesn't like it, I think it's time for you to move on and say, okay, fine, I'm going to change it, right? At the end, yes, it is your design, but the end user is going to be your client, and they're the ones that are going to be looking at that every day. And if they don't like it, they're not going to have a good experience. And every time they use it or they see it, they're going to be thinking of like, that stupid architect didn't change it, right? So I think that was one of the hardest things to do for me, because as the project manager for the project, I was like, the client doesn't like this, and he's made it very obvious to you in the past 2 times that we've come to discuss this design reviews, and you have not changed it. So he needs you to change this by the following review. Like, it's not an option. It's something that you guys need to do. And it was hard for me because sometimes architects, especially if they're in the older side and they think they're like one of the best designers that there is hard to say these things, and it's hard for them to hear it too. But I think this one time it was very clear to me that, as the designer, you need to listen to your client, because he's paying for you to do the work, and second, he's the user. He needs to feel comfortable and happy in the space, and it needs to be an enjoyable space for the client. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it? I think sometimes we think we know better, but at the end user is the person that's going to be enjoying the space, and we need to listen to them, right? So that was one of the hardest things I had to do in my career, because of course this person was a well-known architect, and I just didn't know how to do it. So I just said, I'm just going to say it. And he didn't like me after that, but I did what I had to do. So that's one story of many that I had to go through in 23 years of architecture and 17 years in construction. So that comes to another point. Difference between construction knowledge and no construction knowledge as a designer. So when you hire someone to do your design, is that person experienced in the way construction is done? For example, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but a client called me, or like they reached out to me and asked me, if I could design a 700 No, it was a 500 um, ADU. It was a garage conversion, and they wanted to add 50 square feet to the garage because they wanted it to be a little bit bigger. And it was sort of like a space between their house and the garage. And it was going to be kind of weird if we didn't fill it to make the garage into an ADU. So they asked me, do you think we can do this with $115,000? And I said, yeah, I think it's doable. I think, most garage conversions price range between probably 90 to 140, $150,000, depending on the size of the garage and the design and the layout. But I said, yes, I think it's doable. So I sent them the contract for the design and the construction drawings of it. And then the client said, well, one of my friends started to working in architecture, so he's going to do the design for us. But when the drawings are done, I'm going to send them to you for pricing. And I said, okay, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. You can hire someone else to do the design. So they did. They hired that other person to do the design. And then when they sent me the drawings, and I gave them the price was $150,000 or close to that number. And the client called me and he was upset. He said, you said that it was going to be $115,000 and I told you that was my budget. Why is the price $150,000? And I said, well, I'm giving you the price based on the plans that you sent me. For example, you have your kitchen area and your bathroom area in opposite sides of the garage. If I were to do the layout, taking into account that you want to spend the least amount of money, I would want to put all the plumbing in a wall where, the kitchen and the bathroom are sharing the wall so that I don't have to open an additional 20, 25 feet of trenching and for plumbing purposes than it needs to be. When I design, I need to take into account that because I know that you want to spend $115,000 instead of $150,000, right? So that's the difference between having someone that knows about construction, designing your project versus someone that is not experienced in construction. And I think that was one of the most notorious projects that I had that happened. Of course, it happened a few times, but I think that was the one that the client was very upset because I had told him that yes, we could do it for 115, and once I got the drawings, it was 150. So he asked me to value engineer his project so that we could do it for 115. And I said, well, it's not about value engineering, it's about changing the layout so that we can do those things that I talked to you about. If you have your plumbing in just one wall, then it shares the bathroom and the kitchen, then we don't have to do a lot more work, and that definitely will save you a lot of money. So things like that can make a big difference when you are designing a project. And definitely something that you need to take into account. If you were to tell me I have no budget, then I would be like, well, it doesn't matter. You can basically do whatever you want, get whatever finishes you want, and you're good, right? But the reality is that most of us are always looking to maximize or design, maximize our space, and spend the least amount of money, right? I think that is a good design where you can maximize your expectations and minimize the amount of money that you're going to pay for it. And I think, having an experienced designer and an experienced contractor can change the way your project is designed and the way the project is constructed. So those two things are very important to discuss with your designer and with your contractor when you are thinking about your ADU projects. What other things do you look for a good design and a bad design? I think it's about the construction documents. I had, like I said in the other podcast, when you have construction documents that have a lot of notes, but it's not connected to a construction detail or a construction fixture or something that goes into your ADU, it's very hard to have everything addressed. Construction is a complex process. It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of work. And in order for you to have all these things work together, I think if you have a good set of plans, it will result in a better project. What do I mean by a good set of construction documents? It is a plan that has, of course, the floor plan, a reflected ceiling plan, a roof plan, interior elevations, because a lot of people do not provide interior elevations of their projects, but it is hard for a client and even sometimes for a contractor to visualize the kind of space that you want to construct and the kind of materials that you want to have on each wall. You don't have to be like, have a sheet with all of the materials that need to go into each of the areas of the ADU. But when you do have interior elevations, it makes a lot more sense to the contractor. As the client, you understand your project better because you look at a wall and you say, oh, my window's going to be here and my closet is going to be on this side, but the bed is not going to fit in this area. Or, it makes you aware of and more conscious of furniture layout, of finishes on each and every wall of the ADU. And it's just, it does not take a long time for a designer or an architect to provide interior elevations, but it goes a long way to understand the project better. Also because you visualize the height of the room. If you have a cathedral ceiling, you can see the space better in an elevation than use the floor plan, right? Or the reflected ceiling plan. And I know some designers provide 3D drawings, which is great, but not a lot of people want to pay for a 3D design or 3D page in their plans. But, interior elevations go a long way to understand the spaces a lot better. So I would recommend to have interior elevations done, especially for the kitchen and the bathroom, because in those interior elevations, you're able to know, very specific questions. How, in your bathroom, how high do you want your tile in your walls? You want it on the way up to the ceiling or just at 5 feet or 6 feet or whatever, And of course, that also goes into consideration for the pricing of your bathroom and all that. So when you have those interior elevations, it gives you a lot more information, and you can easily visualize everything, and it just goes a long way. Another thing is details. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of projects where there's only like one or two details, and I just don't understand it. Why? What are the details for the construction? And the details is where you specify really specific information. So the designer is assuming that the contractor knows exactly what they want, or exactly what they're visualizing, or what the client is visualizing. I think details are very, very important, especially when you have a little bit more complex projects, when you have, if you have a parapet, you have a flat roof instead of a pitch roof. When you have a balcony, what kind of waterproofing, what kind of finishes do you do in those things? And I've seen a lot of projects where they have balconies and they have no information about waterproofing, or the finishes details for the balcony. And those things are very important. You want to make sure that that the balconies are waterproof, and that you have a specific design for that, because you don't want to have problems or issues later on. And I'm not saying that the contractor is not going to know how to do it, but when you provide a design for those, then as a designer that you're doing a good job, and that you're being very specific, and that exactly what you're specifying and what you're designing. So I think that as a contractor, I'm very surprised when I get those kinds of drawings for to give a price to a client, and there's no information and no details on waterproofing. There's no information on finishes. There's no information on basic things, like I'm assuming most contractors know how to install a window, but it doesn't take a long. It's a very standard detail to provide a window installation detail for your ADU. And as a designer, I think if you include that information, you're being conscious of what you're proposing, of how you want that design to look at the end. And I'm surprised that a lot of drawings, when I get them for pricing, do not include that kind of information. A lot of drawings do not include any roofing details. And again, the roof is very important because you're designing it, and the roof is a very big surface in your design. So how does the eave connects to the wall? Do you have, what is that detail? What does that look like? If you just leave it to the contractor's experience, you may be getting something that that was not your intent. So I think a good set of construction documents is able to tell you all this information, and when you are trying to hire someone to do your project, I think you should ask for samples of their work so you can go through it and understand it. I was trained in architectural offices where we had like a set of sheets that we had to follow and produce for certain things. So all your plans go in one sheet, all your details go in another sheet, your elevations go in another sheet, your building sections go in another sheet. That's one more thing. I've got sets of construction documents that do not have a building section. And I think a building section is one of the most important drawings in a set of construction documents, because again, that's where you can, let the contractor know how you want materials to go together. And, and I can't believe that I reviewed plans with no building sections whatsoever. And I think those are important. So again, a good set is also a well thought design set. Not only design your layout, not only design your ADU, not only design, how your project's going to look, but how do you present the information in a way, one, that the plan checker is going to have a sequence of sheets where the information flows, right? I've gotten sets for pricing where I have the plan, and then I have details in that same plan, but it does not relate to the drawing, the floor plan that I'm looking at, but the details are referencing like the elevations or other parts of the drawing. So that is just being picky now, maybe. But the way that I was trained as an architect or as an architectural designer was to have a sequence of documents in a way that makes the reader or the person that's checking the plans to have a flow of information that makes it easier to understand and visualize the project. And I think a lot of people do not do that. The information is all over the place. The keynotes are all over the place. And it just makes it harder for someone to understand the project. Anyways, if you have any questions in regards to that, please feel free to go to the website, rosaandcompany.com, and send me a message. Or, if you want me to review plans for you or give you an honest opinion what I think of the plans, you can do that. You can also find us in the social media, Rosa and Company, in Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can reach me that way as well, and I'll make sure that I answer your questions. So I think that's it for today. If you have any other questions or anything related to what would be a good design or a bad design, or what is a good set of construction documents, just contact me and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you again, and this is Rosa.